Kia ora tātou. Welcome back to another stop on the Hell Pizza's Great New Zealand book trip. Also, warm welcome to all of you joining us for the first time. I'm Siang Te, the marketing manager at Hell Pizza, and I'll be introducing our special author for today. I'll come back a little bit later on and host some Q&As and then announce the two winners of our giveaway, which is, of course, today's book, Atua. Just before I begin, I just wanted to say how awesome it is to see how so many of you here today. All of us at Hell love that we're able to help tamariki like you develop a passion for reading through the Hell Reading Challenge and now the Great New Zealand Book Trip. There's so many unique and talented authors writing about our beautiful country, and with the Great New Zealand Book Trip, we hope you'll continue to come along and discover the amazing places right here in Aotearoa. And so it's time to welcome our author for today, who's taking us on today's trip, Gavin Bishop. Now, Gavin of Tainui and Ngāti Awa is the author and illustrator of 70 books and lives in Christchurch. As well as Atua, he's also written Koro, Mahy, and Wildlife of New Zealand. Atua was crowned the 2022 Margaret Mahy Book of the Year at the New Zealand Book Awards for children and young adults, the 5th time his works have been acknowledged with this prize. Other accolades include the Storylines Margaret Mahy Award for service to children's literature, an honorary doctorate from the University of Canterbury, and the Prime Minister's Award for Literary Achievements in Non-Fiction in 2019. Gavin's books have also been translated into 12 different languages, taking his stories about Aotearoa to the world. So it's a pleasure, and it's time to sit back and enjoy, and I'll see you a bit later on. Over to you, Gavin.
Hey, thank you very much. He mihi nui kia koutou. It's great to be here, and I'm absolutely astounded that so many schools are joining us this morning. I'm going to start by having a look at Atua. I can't look at the whole book because there's actually too much there, and we'd need to have a couple of hours, I think. But what I thought I'd do is just sort of pick out the stories that look at the arrival of the first Polynesian settlers who came to live here in this country. Do you know, when I was at school, a long time ago, when I was at primary school, we used to be told that there were only 7 waka that came to Aotearoa. There were only 7. And later, as I grew up and started reading more for myself, I found that there were hundreds. And they didn't all just come at one time. They came over a very long period. And they came from lots of different islands in the South Pacific Ocean. Well, anyway, Aotearoa, it's part of a mythology or a system of creation stories that were created by the people living in this part of the world. And they decided that one of their demigods, it was a character called Maui Portiki, he went fishing with his older brothers. Now, he didn't get on with his older brothers. He had 4 older brothers, and they thought he was much younger than them, and they thought he was a real pain. And they did everything they could to get away from him. They would sort of trick him into staying at home and while they went fishing and things like that. Well, on one particular occasion, he tricked them by getting into their waka before they went fishing, and he hid under the floorboards, I suppose, somewhere like that. And when they got out into the ocean, he appeared and said, "Here I am. You've gone too far now. You can't take me home." And they were really, really annoyed. The brothers were annoyed. Anyway, they said, "Okay, well, you may as well do some fishing now that you're here." Well, he had this fish hook that was actually made from the jawbone of his grandmother. Now, that sounds pretty bizarre, but she gave it to him. She gave it to him. She unhooked it out of her mouth and she gave it to him. And he decorated it with mother of pearl and dog hair. So it was pretty stylish. And he threw that overboard, attached to a rope, of course, and it caught onto a thing down in the ocean, which he pulled up with all his might, and it turned out to be a great big fish. Well, we now know that fish as the North Island of New Zealand of Aotearoa. And later, while he was celebrating this huge fish, the catch of it, his waka turned into the South Island, and their anchor turned into the Stewart Island. So these three main island areas of Aotearoa are all make reference to Maui Potiki and his fishing. Well, many years later, it may have been Maui that actually created Aotearoa, but it was Kupe, who many years later, he rediscovered Aotearoa. And this is what I'm going to read you this page from my book about how Kupe discovered Aotearoa. Maui Potiki fished up the North Island of Aotearoa, but it was Kupe from Hawaii who sailed south and found this new land again. The discovery of Aotearoa in about AD 950, it was due to the greediness of a giant wheke, an octopus. It was eating all the fish that Kupe and his friends wanted to catch. So Kupe decided to kill it. Well, one morning, Kupe set out in his waka, and he took his wife, Kura Marotini, with him as well, and their children went along too. So they were sort of going off fishing, but it looked to me as if they were preparing for quite a long trip. There was another waka that went with them as well, and on that waka was his best friend, Ngake. Well, the giant wheke soon saw the waka, and it took off, and it fled south. The fleet of waka took chase. One day, they followed the flight paths, they followed the flight paths of migratory birds and read the patterns of the clouds and waves. And by night, they watched the stars and they chanted karakia from the kete of knowledge, just as we might use a GPS system to drive around the countryside today. After some time, the octopus reached the northern tip of the tail of Maui's great fish, the North Island. From there, it sped down the east coast of the island with Kupe and Ngake close behind in their waka. When Kura Marotini, Kupe's wife, saw the long strip of land clouded in mist, she called it Aotearoa, long white cloud, or land of long white cloud. And when the two waka caught up with the giant octopus, Kupe got his crew to throw some gourds overboard. This tricked the octopus into thinking that they were the heads of men in the water. And as it lunged for them, Kupe struck and killed the octopus with one blow. Now, after that adventure, Kupe went back to Hawaii and told all of his family about this wonderful new land that he had discovered. It was a land of birds and trees. Like 85% of the land was covered with trees, and they were filled with millions and millions of birds. There were so many birds that when people were in the forest, in the bush, and tried to speak to one another, they couldn't, because the bird song was so loud. So anyway, after a few years, another person, happened to be Kupe's grandson, he decided that he would go and have a look at this land that his grandfather had told him about. And about that time, a lot of these islands in the Pacific were becoming rather crowded. There wasn't much room for anyone to live anymore comfortably. And so it was decided that some groups of people would leave and migrate south and arrive and live in this new land that had been discovered by Kupe. Now, again, when I was at primary school, we were told that the early Polynesian settlers had a lot of trouble getting here. Well, that's rubbish. They were great navigators. They were great mariners. They could get into a waka and they could sail and go wherever they wanted to go. They did not get to places accidentally, on the whole. And so these people, I believe it took about 2 weeks, these people left their home and they came here to this country and they set up new homes. Now, there was lots of waka and they came over a long period of time. And as each major waka arrived, they brought with them vegetables, and they brought plants, and they brought even some animals with them from their own home. Now, a lot of those plants didn't survive. Like, they brought bananas. Well, they planted them here and it was too cold. They just died. Now, they also brought kumara. And kumara is not the kind of kumara that we go and buy at the supermarket now. It was much smaller, and the actual, the rhizomes were actually much thinner, about as thick as your thumb. And they'd come from South America. They bought those, and they managed to grow those quite successfully. And they even managed to grow them as far south as where I live. And that was unusual. That was very, very unusual. The Maoris were very, very good gardeners. So, as I said, these people arrived and stayed in particular places, often where their waka had arrived, and they identified with that particular area. And when they were, they identified in the area so that when they stood up at a marae or at a special gathering and said where they'd come from, they had a particular pattern. They had a kind of a pepeha. And I just want to mention this little book here. It's called Mahy. And it might seem pretty like a baby's book, which is what it is. It is a baby's book. And it's very, very simple. But it actually makes reference to a person standing up at a marae and giving their identity, saying who they are, where they've come from. How are we going for time? Are we all right?
Yep, we're good for time. Yep.
Okay. You tell me when I should be winding up, because we've got questions, things to answer, which I'm looking forward to very much.
Yeah, you've got plenty of time, probably about 10 minutes.
15 minutes? Okay, well, this little mihi, it actually follows the structure of a pepeha. And the first thing that's mentioned, which on this page it says tōku waka, it's actually referring to the waka that your ancestors or that person's ancestors arrived in Aotearoa in. And so that's the first thing that's mentioned in a mihi. And then the next thing is probably the most prominent aspect of your home area, of the land around where you live. It might be a mountain. And so you would mention your mountain. So this is tōku maunga. And of course, if you were standing up, say, talking about this, you would actually mention the name of the mountain as well. And then often you would mention your awa, the river, and then the marae, and then your iwi or your ancestors, the people that you belong to that began living here in this particular spot of this country. And then you might look at your whānau, your family. And then you might mention your mum's name, tōku mama, your dad's name, and then you would finish by saying who you were. So that little book, as I said, is all about identity, and it relates directly back to the arrival of those early Polynesian settlers. You notice I'm calling them Polynesian because at that stage there were no such things as Māori. The name Māori was not used until Europeans came to live in Aotearoa. And when they kept saying to the people who lived here, the indigenous people, they'd say, well, what's your name? Who are you? And they would say, oh, well, I'm Ngati Awa, I'm Ngati Pukek or something like that. And they say, no. What sort of people are you? So in the end, the Polynesian people who had been living here for 800 or 900 years by that stage, they said, okay, we're Māori. And Māori means ordinary, common, normal. Here we are. You know, we are the status quo. And so that's how they then became called Māori. So I think that's really, really interesting. Now, the reason I know all of this is because I have been doing a lot of research lately for the books that I've been working on. And when I worked on Atua, I had to do lots and lots and lots of reading because, again, like the kind of identities that these Polynesian people adopted when they came to live here, there's stories that they brought with them on those waka, along with the kuma and with the bananas and the rats and the dogs. They brought all these stories. And these stories that I have retold in Atua are thousands of years old. They're much, much older than this country. They go back thousands of years. And the thing that I found difficult about retelling them was they change according to the area or the location within this country where they come from. So if you read some of the stories about Maui Portuguese that I mentioned before, who fished up the North Island, if you read about him, say, in Northland, those stories will be quite different if you read the stories or listen to stories about Maui, say, that are told here in Ōtautahi, Christchurch. They have all been flavored by the retelling and by the people who have told them over centuries. Now, these stories were never written down. So that's why they're kind of flexible. And you know yourself that when you tell a story or you tell about something that's happened, it changes a little bit each time you tell it, because you might add a few more details, or you might add a few names, or you might add a few things like that. Well, that's exactly what's happened to these stories. That as they've been told over hundreds of years, retold, people have added other extra details. And quite often they would add the names of places where the stories might actually have been told or where they were being retold. So it's very interesting and very complicated. So my challenge as a children's book author was to keep it as simple as possible. For a start, I had a limited number of pages. I was only allowed 64 pages to tell these stories in. So it didn't matter how much I wanted to put in there, I was restricted before I even started by the number of pages the book was going to have. Now, you might wonder why they chose 64. Well, 64 is actually twice the length of a normal picture book. A normal picture book is 32 pages. And so this is like 2 picture books in one. I was also limited by the page size. They said, this is the page size. This is how big you can have your pages. And so, as I said, there were limitations, and I had to work within those. There was all this information, which I had to reduce. And the other thing the publishers wanted me to do was to use lots of pictures. And so you can see here is the page, the coupe page. So I had to make the picture just as important as the words. So that was quite tricky. Luckily, I had a very good designer who managed to squeeze my words onto my pages. Now, I think some people will be asking me questions about how I make books and how I put books together. But perhaps I could talk a little bit about that now, do you think?
Yep, sure thing. Hey, thank you very much. It's just for that little start bit. It's such a good. It's so good to sort of hear the words coming directly from you. You know, you're such a good storyteller, and it's, you know, it kind of makes, you know, I've got Atua at home, and I'm slowly making my way through it with my own children, and you know, some of the words of, you know, your words sort of can come alive when you speak it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah. Let's move on to the questions. And
okay, that's a good idea.
We've got some questions while we're on Atua. Some really good questions.
Yes.
The kids from Ikatahuna School would love to learn a little bit more about the pictures, about the materials you use, and how you started in the illustration process.
Good. Well, first of all, let me say that I am still I'm quite old-fashioned in the way I make my artwork. I still take pieces of paper and draw on them with pencil, and then go over the pencil lines with ink and paint and things like that. I still like doing that. I like physically making a picture on a piece of paper. Now, a lot of younger illustrators don't work like that at all. They work directly onto their computer, I can't do that. I haven't learned how to do that. So I tend to start, I've got several of these big books here. I've got several of these. So I tend to start, well, no, really rough drawings and lots of notes. And then all in pencil. Don't look like much, but they're just ways of how I might fill the page and where I might put the text. So there's no detail, no information. Then I might start looking at a more detailed page drawing with more detailed drawings, a bit more sort of text, and so on. And then when I've got the book sort of sorted out, well, here's another book. This was for Aotearoa, this book. These pictures are some of the first pictures I did for Aotearoa. Well, the thing I do after that is to make up what is called a dummy. It's not a book for dumb people. It's a book which has nothing in it. So here is a book I'm working on at the moment. I make it up myself. I make it out of paper, as you can see, and I staple it down the back, down here. And the only thing it has in common with the final book is that it is the same size and has the same number of pages. So here is, you see what I've done with the text? I've constructed it on my computer, written it on my computer, then I've printed it off and I've glued it onto the page so I can see how much room I've got left for the illustration. It's really important that you give the text plenty of room. There's nothing worse than looking at a book where the text hasn't got enough room. It looks terrible. Now this book is unusual because it's got gatefolds. You ready? Whoops. These pages fold out, and we're getting a great big spread. This is a pā site in Taranaki. Of course, it doesn't exist anymore, but this is just my first rough drawings. And then I do each one of those big pages on a separate board of paper. I'll just show you one. Just excuse me for a second. Okay, part of a pā site up in Northland during the New Zealand Wars. And what happens then is, when I've finished all of that artwork, I take it to a scanner, and the scanner makes digital images of those my pictures. Then she emails them or transfers them or something like that digitally to my designer who lives in Wellington, and he then gets my words and puts them into place on the pictures. And when he's got all that, when he's done the whole book, it's a big job, as you can imagine, that whole book is sent to China, and where it's printed by Big Printing Works. So that's how I work. It's a long process.
Yeah, it seems like a long process. You go through some pretty significant periods where you're putting all your initial thoughts down, then refining it. Thank you. And that kind of leads on to the question that Room 5 from Kaitoki School had about Atua and how long it took you to write it all and illustrate it. And
2 years, about 2 years.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's
about
a lot
2
of. Well, yeah. I mean, 2 years. To be honest, I thought it might be a bit longer with all the research you had to do and stuff like that. So,
well, I work on it full time. I mean, I don't have to do anything else. I mean, I work on it full time. And yeah, it was about 2 years, that book.
Cool. Now, the kids at Hardlow Proprietary School, they wanted to know which of your books did you enjoy making the most?
I think I enjoyed making Piano Rock. Now, that was published, about 2008, 2009. I think it's still available, but I enjoyed doing that because it was quite a different sort of book to what I've normally done. And it is a book about my childhood. When I first started school at a little school at a place called Kingston, which is just south of Queenstown on Lake Wakatipu. And it's very personal because it's about things I remember. It's about my family. It's about my aunts and uncles and people like that who were a big part of my life. All of those people are dead now. And so I enjoyed doing it because it made me remember that early part of my life. So yeah, that's an important book for me.
That's really good. That's really nice. I'll have to try and track it down and have a little read with my kids.
Yeah, I think your kids would enjoy it. My 8-year-old grandson read it recently, and he really loved it. In fact, his father read it to him at night and at bedtime. And when they finished, he simply said to his father, "Start again," which was a great commendation for the book.
Yeah. Good. Cool. So that's really good. So the kids at Galston School,
Galston School.
Yeah, they've got some kids that are from Kingston too, and they want to hear about it. So that might be a good book for them too.
Yeah.
So the next question we've got from Pukekohe East School from Rimu House.
Yeah.
And they wanted to know, what's one piece of advice would you give to kids who love to write and may like to become future published authors in New Zealand?
The best thing I think you can do is to be a reader. Read lots of books, because that way, especially fiction, books that have been created by really good writers, read those, because you can see how stories are told and how words are used. I just think reading is really, really important. If you want to be an illustrator, then you do have to practice your drawing, unless you use computer. But then I think you've still got to be able to draw quite well. You've still got to be able to draw. And this is one of the things that you need to just practice. And if you like it, well, it's not a chore. I mean, those people who want to be illustrators, they know they want to be an illustrator, and they will do whatever it takes to be a good illustrator. They won't just sort of say, oh, it's too hard, I don't want to do it. Well, therefore they shouldn't be doing it. The people who want to be an artist, the people who want to be writers, they will do whatever it is necessary to achieve the results they want.
Yep. That's it's all, I guess it's all about, practicing and immersing yourself into what you really love, like whether it be writing, whether it be creating, painting. It's important just to practice and to
that's right.
To learn from other people's work too, right?
Yeah. Yes, that's right.
Cool. Now Morningside School, Team Tui, had this, I'm not sure if this is an easy one, but it might be, but they wanted to know who your favorite character is and why.
What, in one of my books?
Let's yeah.
Okay. Oh, I don't know. I don't know.
we could track it down to.
I think probably one of my favorite characters. And I didn't know anything about this person, and I still don't know anything about him. But the character in this book, called Cook's Cook, is a man called John Thompson. Now, I don't know very much about him, except he was the cook on the Endeavour when James Cook came to Aotearoa in 1769. And he was the cook. But what makes it really interesting is that he had only one hand. Can you imagine cooking for 93 people on board that ship and you only had one hand? I mean, he had some help. He had people working with him. But even so, I often try to imagine what it must have been like to be a cook with only one hand. Seemingly, it was quite common in those days for people who'd been injured in some way. They got jobs on ships doing work like being a cook. It was quite common. So he's one of my favorite characters, I think.
Yeah. And
I had to make up a lot about it. I didn't know anything except he had one hand and he may have come from Scotland. That's about as much as I could find out about him. But people have forgotten. It happens a long time ago, and they only remember those two things.
Cool. Sounds like a really interesting character. Cool. Now the next question comes from Akumangua Rua from Bellevue School in Tauranga. When you were growing up, did you have a favorite book or a favorite series?
Yes, I did. Now, one of my favorite books when I was growing up was The Hobbit. And I found out about it in a very interesting way. Now, when I went to primary school, we used to get the school journal delivered to school, and these were like magazines that were published by the government printing works, and they were free, and they came to schools, and they had stories and poems and illustrations by quite well-known illustrators and by quite well-known New Zealand artists. And I can remember on one occasion, a school journal turned up at school, and I was reading it, and I came across this. It was just one chapter from The Hobbit, and it was about, if you know the book, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. It was called something like Riddles in the Dark, and it's when Bilbo Baggins meets Gollum for the first time, and it's dark, and it's down in a dark tunnel in the mountains, and Gollum traps Bilbo Baggins and says he'll only let him go if he give him the answer to his most complicated riddle. And of course, luckily, Bilbo Baggins knows the answer and is able to escape, and escapes off into the dark, and Gollum tries to chase him and find him. And I found it so exciting, so interesting, that the next time I was in town, we lived down in Invercargill at this particular time. Next time I was in town, I went to the library, and I got a copy of the book, and I read it, and it was just wonderful. And I've read that book several times throughout my life, and of course, seen the movies and all that sort of stuff. But I still like the book most. I still like the book the best.
Yeah,
it's one of my favorites.
Yeah. And you mentioned you watched the movie. Did you? How did you find Peter Jackson's?
I found it was sort of overblown.
Yeah.
I thought it was too big. The book itself is quite small, and it's about these little hobbits, and they go off and have this adventure which is far bigger than they are. And I just found 3 great big epic movies was sort of out of scale with how I always imagined the book.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I guess it's so hard to each person's interpretation, like you
That's right
before, about stories, each person's
That's
interpretation.
Right.
It's so different. There's
it's a bit like my interpretations of these stories in Atua. Somebody could look at those and think, oh, they're too simple, or they're too simplistic, or something.
Yeah. Cool. Probably have one more time for one more question. Now, I think we got a little peek before, but the kids from the Remarkables Primary wanted to know a little bit, a little bit about your next project, if you're allowed, if you're able to.
Yep, I am. Well, I've got 2 projects at the moment. I'm finding it quite interesting because I've got 2 main publishers. I publish with Gecko Press, and I publish with Penguin Random House. Now, Gecko Press asked me to publish what I call babies' books. And that's not because they're babyish, it's because they are geared to a particular age. So as I've just shown you, Mahy, well, there's a follow-up to this book called Koro, and there's a follow-up to that one called E Hoa, and I've just finished another baby's book for this publishing house. Now I find that interesting because You cannot, in these books, have any extra material. It has to be really simple. You have to eliminate practically everything except for just the essence of the idea for that page. You might be allowed 1 or perhaps 2 words on a page. That's it. Then with Penguin Random House, I've been doing these huge books that take an enormous amount of time, an enormous amount of research and thinking and planning and agonizing over. Some nights I wake up in the middle of the night and lie there thinking, how can I solve this particular problem that I'm having with this particular page? And so that's the sort of book that I'm doing with them. And as I showed you before, the project that I'm currently working on is this one here. It's called, I've just called it Patu because it's a good short name, but it's about the New Zealand Wars, which took place, sort of roughly between 1845 and 1880, mainly in the North Island of Aotearoa. And so that I've spent, so far, I have spent 18 months on the text. And that's not creating a text, it's sort of writing a text that's suitable for my book. And a lot of it has been reducing the enormous amount of information that there is out there, just whittling it down, cutting it back, rewriting it so that it's interesting, but spare.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. That's exciting. I'm looking forward to reading both. In my household, we've got Mahy and Koro. So yeah, looking forward to the going through the next 2. Hey, so we're just gonna head over and announce the winners of our book giveaway today, which is of course Atua, and the winners are Edmonton Primary School, Room 5, and also Koro Matua School. So look out! Congratulations! Look out for those coming your way shortly. Yeah, so hey, so I just want to say thank you very much for sharing sharing your words, sharing your creative process, and just sharing your knowledge today with all of us. I'm sure I'm not the only one thinking this, but I think the work you do is so important, and it's so important to the culture of Aotearoa, because it keeps these cultural stories alive, whether it be the baby books or the Penguin Publish House books. It's so important. Like, I keep referring back to Mahy because with my own young kids, it's so easy to teach them about lineage and teach them about where people come from and how people get there and how a culture develops, because it's so the simplicity of it. And I with my slightly older child reading Atua to her, she's slowly grasping, putting everything together and figuring it out, and that's why I think it's so important. Your work is brilliant.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Cool.
Even though I couldn't see anyone.
I'm sure there were lots of smiles and lots of nodding. And yeah, so hey, thanks to everyone that came and joined us for another live reading. Hope to see you next time, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much indeed. And thank you, Hell Pizza, for what you do for reading in New Zealand.